For spirituality, addictions are seen as negative patterns that limit personal development, whether these are physical addictions, such as alcohol, drugs, or food, or emotional addictions, such as attachment and anger. They arise from an attempt to fill an internal void or to deal with traumas and unresolved emotions. Spirituality encourages us to see addictions as a symptom of something within us that needs attention. Instead of judging or condemning, it is important to understand the origin of this behavior so that we have the necessary resources and find a way to heal and transform ourselves internally, making us less susceptible to addictions. Often, we gradually begin to make unhealthy choices, using as justification the fact that we do so only as a way to alleviate emotional pain, escape discomfort, accept a loss, or even fill a void that persists. At first, an attitude that was only meant to serve as temporary relief or fleeting peace turns into a vicious cycle. We end up trapped in harmful habits, a destructive routine that only harms us and that, unfortunately, for many people, lasts for years. But what makes us repeat something that we are aware only harms us? The truth is that these behaviors almost always reveal deep wounds, reflections of something we are trying to fill, even if it seems like an impossible mission. It is not just a search for pleasure or immediate relief, but a need to reconnect with something that we feel is missing in our lives. As destructive as it may seem, the truth is that there is a silent inner search for meaning, an effort to deal with something that we often cannot even identify. So, instead of fighting these habits, without realizing it, we incorporate them into our lives until they become addictions. Behind every addiction, there is a story of disconnection, a desperate search for something, and understanding this process is the first step to seeing what is really happening. When this truth emerges, everything changes. Addiction ceases to be just a battle against a bad habit and begins to show that there is a deeper explanation and reason. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, brought an intriguing view of addiction. He believed that addiction is not just a weakness or a character flaw, as many believe, but rather a desperate attempt to find meaning, an attempt to fill a silent existential void that torments so many people. Many end up getting lost in self-destructive habits because they are looking for some form of peace amidst the chaos of everyday life. Most people use addiction as a bridge to relieve anxiety or feelings of dissatisfaction with life. How many times have you, or someone you know, tried to find answers in places that only brought even more frustration? Whether through substances, harmful behaviors, or even less obvious addictions, such as overwork or the constant need for approval. The real problem is not just the addiction itself, but what it tries to cover up. Carl Jung's perspective makes us look beyond the surface and question what we are really looking for. Perhaps you have already asked yourself this question, and this is a chance to understand what is hidden behind this internal struggle and realize that many of our actions are reflections of unconscious and automatic behavior. Therefore, addiction is not just a mistake, much less a weakness. It represents an attempt, albeit misguided, to adjust to a world that seems distant from what really matters. Imagine someone who turns to drinking to relieve stress after a difficult day, believing that it will ease the emotional burden. In reality, this person is seeking something deeper, a sense of peace or connection that self-knowledge or spiritual practices could provide. But when they sink into these addictions, what they find is an even greater void. In the end, addiction becomes a prison, a frustrated attempt to find happiness and meaning where they will never be. Addiction can manifest itself in subtle ways. It is not only the more visible addictions such as alcohol and drugs that evidence this search. Addictions to food, work, social media, shopping, gaming, and even relationships can be ways of coping with feelings of emptiness or discontent. These habits may seem harmless or even productive at first glance, but over time they become harmful and damaging ways of escaping reality. Even activities that are generally healthy, such as exercise or work, can become addictions when used as an escape valve. Thus, these behaviors reveal a constant search for immediate gratification, but leave lasting well-being behind. The benefits of facing suffering to achieve true inner peace arise when we accept who we are and stop running away from our fears and insecurities. It is at this moment that addiction loses its strength. This incessant and frustrated search for answers outside of ourselves is something we all experience at some point in our lives. For Jung, looking inside ourselves and integrating our shadows, those hidden parts that we avoid, is essential to understanding our unconscious motivations. Practices such as meditation, philosophy, and spirituality can help us overcome suffering in a healthy way, without the need to get lost in habits that distance us from who we really are. So, ask yourself what you are seeking in your habits. Are you trying to fill a void that can only be resolved by reconnecting with your essence? Jung brought up the concept of the shadow, that part of ourselves that we prefer to hide, made up of desires and impulses that we consider unacceptable. But ignoring it does not make it disappear. In fact, the more we repress this shadow, the more it grows and manifests itself, often through addictions. Addiction is often a form of expression of repressed parts of our psyche that we have not yet brought to our consciousness. What we avoid within ourselves ends up silently controlling us. Our shadow is a powerful force that continues to be present, even when we do everything to pretend it does not exist. When we avoid facing this part of ourselves, it begins to increasingly affect our lives. For example, someone who suppresses anger or resentment may end up developing addictions as an unconscious way of dealing with these unresolved feelings. Without realizing it, this person turns to alcohol or drugs for temporary relief, without realizing that, in fact, they are feeding the same impulses that they use through addictions. This cycle is destructive, because the more we try to escape repressed emotions, the more the addiction becomes stronger as an escape mechanism. Addiction, in this context, is an attempt to deal with one's shadow, but in a way that only makes the problem worse instead of solving it. The way to overcome addictions is to recognize and accept these darker aspects of our personality. When we do this, we stop living in denial and begin to see that these repressed parts can be integrated in a healthy way. A person who seeks excessive control, for example, may end up finding in addiction a way to exercise it in an environment that seems safer. But when the person begins to face these desires and understand their needs consciously, the addiction loses its strength and reason. Integrating this shadow requires courage and self-knowledge to look within and recognize that we all have aspects of our personality that we prefer to ignore. For Jung, integrating the shadow is transforming what was once a burden into a source of strength. Instead of seeing addiction as an enemy, it becomes an opportunity for growth. Accepting our shadow allows us to direct this energy towards something that truly enriches our lives. We often hide our vulnerability and frustrations, but the more we avoid these parts of ourselves, the more the shadow grows stronger and addiction emerges as a sign that something is out of balance within us. Facing our shadows is not an easy task. It involves confronting our flaws, the mistakes we have made, and the feelings we have avoided. When we accept our shadow, we realize that it is not our enemy, but an essential part of our humanity. It is necessary not only to accept this part of ourselves, but to actively integrate it. This can be done through introspective practices, such as therapeutic meditation, or even by writing about our thoughts and feelings in a journal, exploring who we really are in a safe space. The more we understand and accept what we repress, the more control we gain over our actions, and, little by little, the addiction loses its hold on us. Spiritual emptiness is one of the main drivers behind many addictions and compulsive behaviors that we see today. This emptiness appears when we disconnect from our true selves, from the essential part that unites our consciousness with the unconscious and represents our wholeness. Without this connection, we feel that something vital is missing. Many times, we try to alleviate discomfort with compulsions, be they substances, shopping, excessive use of technology, or toxic relationships. The fact is that these solutions only mask the problem, while the emptiness continues to grow within us. This situation is even more intense in the modern world, where we are constantly pressured to seek material success, extreme productivity, and external validation. We are bombarded with the idea that our value lies in having more and doing more. As a result, many end up feeling disconnected from themselves and seek comfort in things that offer immediate gratification, but ironically only make the emptiness seem even greater. If we don't find a way to integrate ourselves, we end up stuck in a feeling of incompleteness, always searching for something out of reach to ease our pain. To overcome this feeling, we need to look within, instead of placing our hopes in status, money, or other external distractions. This process allows us to accept ourselves, without relying on external crutches, and realize that the answers we so desperately seek are already within us. For many people, practices such as meditation and therapeutic philosophy help them slow down, silence the external noise, and rediscover their own essence. Self-knowledge and integration are the keys that truly transform this emptiness into fulfillment. As we reconnect with what is most authentic within us, compulsions lose strength, and we find a peace that neither material success nor immediate pleasure can provide. I will share a story about Diane to illustrate what really happens. Diane was a person like so many others. She had a stable job, friends to go out with on the weekends, and a routine that seemed normal to those who knew her. But small getaways with a friend began to become part of her daily routine. At first, it was a fast food meal after work, a beer to de-stress, or a casual bed at a casino. For Diane, these were ways to relieve pressure and deal with stress. But without realizing it, these escapes became a silent addiction, slowly taking over her life. What was once a simple relaxation began to intensify. Drinking became a frequent habit. Trips to the casino became an obsession, and fast food went from being the exception to the rule. Diane noticed that she was increasingly tired and disconnected. Work, which she had previously taken for granted, became a constant source of stress, increasing her anxiety and irritation. Instead of facing the problem, she sank even deeper into her habits, using these vices as a quick way to escape an internal emptiness that she felt but could not put her finger on. It was only when the consequences began to appear that Diane realized the gravity of the situation. The financial instability caused by gambling, the deteriorating health caused by excessive eating and drinking, and the increasingly strained relationships set off alarm bells. Her friends drifted away, and even her family seemed distant. Trapped in a vicious cycle, she tried to get out, but each attempt seemed to leave her even more helpless. She believed there was no way out, and that these addictions were the only relief from her pain and problems. One day, after a night of overindulgence, Diane looked in the mirror and barely recognized the person she saw. Physically exhausted and emotionally destroyed, she understood that she needed to change. In search of answers, she began to reflect and face reality. It was then that she realized that her addictions were, in fact, a way of dealing with her shadow, that repressed side of herself that she avoided facing. Little by little, Diane learned that true freedom did not lie in running away from problems, but in facing them with courage. Determined to regain control, Diane began to make small changes. She cut down on her alcohol intake, started to eat better, and, with great effort, stopped gambling. Each small victory was an important step, and although she knew the healing process would be long, she kept going. On difficult days, when the emptiness returned, instead of giving in, Diane began to look within, practicing meditation and introspection, and exploring more deeply the idea of shadow integration, something Jung described as essential to wholeness. Over time, Diane transformed her life. She simplified her routine, moved away from temptations, and rebuilt ties with her family and friends, who began to see a new Diane, stronger and more centered. She abandoned the desperate search for immediate pleasure and began to value her health and personal growth. Today, when Diane looks back, she sees not only her mistakes, but also how much she grew by overcoming them. Her story teaches us that, no matter how low we are, there is always a path to recovery. She discovered that the true meaning of life is not in fleeting escapes, but in the ability to transform adversity into positive things. Carl Jung believed that the process of individuation is crucial to overcoming addictions, and this vision connects directly with Diane's journey. Jung explained that individuation is the path we take to become who we truly are, by uniting our conscious and unconscious parts, accepting both our strengths and our shadows. When we avoid or repress certain parts of ourselves, they don't just disappear. They end up emerging in other ways, such as addictions, which is exactly what happened to Diane, who tried to fill her emptiness with alcohol, gambling, and food. This was actually a way of dealing with aspects of her psyche that were still divided. Like many people, Diane sought to alleviate her discomfort with self-destructive behaviors, without realizing that this only masked the real problem. Individuation, in this sense, is the process of looking within and recognizing what is hidden, that is, all the insecurities, fears, and desires that we avoid. As she delved deeper into this process, Diane realized that her actions were not simply impulsive choices, but a response to a disconnect she felt with who she really was. This reconnection with her most authentic self proved challenging, but it was liberating. By taking the path of individuation, Diane stopped looking for acceptance and relief outside herself. She understood that her desire to run away would not solve the problem. Instead, she began to embrace the parts of her psyche that she had neglected: her insecurity, her need for control, her fear of failure. Once accepted and understood, these shadows stopped being threats and became opportunities for growth. During this transformation, Diane began to notice repetitive patterns in her life, cycles that led her back to addiction whenever she felt insecure or rejected. In these moments, she would resort to destructive behaviors to relieve the pain, but by recognizing these patterns, she was able to break the cycle. She redirected her energy toward introspection, understanding that the solution did not lie in temporary escapes, but in facing her emotions head-on. Diane realized that she needed to acknowledge the origins of her insecurities and actively work to heal them. Individuation brought her a new sense of responsibility for her own actions, and, most importantly, the clarity that she had always been in control of her life. This process also involved accepting her imperfections, which was essential to her development. For a long time, Diane cultivated an image of perfection to please others, but this only distanced her from who she really was. By letting go of her facade and embracing her flaws, Diane freed herself from the constant pressure to live up to other people's expectations. This move was essential because it allowed her to see her imperfections not as weaknesses, but as necessary parts of her growth. By integrating these parts of herself, Diane discovered that it was possible to live in peace with herself, without having to disguise or lose herself in vices. This transformation made Diane see life in a completely new way. By embracing her shadows and accepting her essence, she began to see challenges no longer as burdens, but as opportunities for evolution. Overcoming her addictions was just one step in this larger process, which freed her to live authentically, without the constant need for approval or fear of making mistakes. She realized that true healing did not lie in immediate solutions, but in self-knowledge. Just like Diane, you can also find this peace, this strength to face your shadows and overcome challenges. Remember that each obstacle is an opportunity to grow and that you are not alone on this journey. If there is one thing that her story teaches us, it is that we all carry within ourselves the answers we so much seek. All we need to do is look with courage and embrace each part of who we are. So, if you are going through a difficult time, know that transformation is possible and that healing begins with the simple act of accepting yourself. Have faith and trust, because change is right there, waiting for you. I hope you enjoyed the video. Share it with others so they can also benefit from this message, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to receive our new content about spirituality. May God bless your life. See you soon.